Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My technology can do that. 3 ways high growth markets can build compliance programs. My name is Amanda Brief. I'm the marketing director at ClausMatch, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping items. Please note all participants except the panelists are muted. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. Additionally, if you have any questions that you want to get addressed during the Q&A, please put them in the Q&A box. And lastly, if you want a recording after this webinar is over, please look out for your inbox tomorrow because we will be sending a link with the presentation as well as the recording. And before we kind of dive in, I just wanted to give you kind of a quick overview of who we are here at ClausMatch. So we're an award-winning regulatory technology company. So we help organizations from large enterprises and financial institutions to insurance, all the way to fintech companies. We're also a global company, so we have offices in the USA, as well as Europe and Asia. And what I mentioned before, some of our biggest clients do include tier 1 banks and insurance organizations, but we also do focus on SMBs and mid-markets as well. And I just want to do kind of a quick intro to introduce all the panelists. I have my colleague, also the moderator for today's webinar, Freddie. He is the head of mid-market and SMB sales here at ClausMatch. So Freddie, you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. Freddie, head of mid-market and SMB sales. What does that mean to ClausMatch? It's pretty much insurance, investment management, fintech, and other sort of mid-market industries which are highly regulated.
Great. Thank you. And as you can see up here, we have a diverse group of people from reg tech space to fintechs to, I know Anna Velvet, you are a recruiter, so we have a lot of great experience that it's going to make for a great conversation during this webinar. So I'll hand it off with Adi first, if you want to kind of do a quick intro.
Sure. So my name is Adi Hafner. I'm a solicitor. I'm the senior legal counsel and risk officer for PensionBee, who's a pension kind of fintech company that started about 6 years ago and listed on the stock exchange in April this year, and is in the high growth kind of, I think our customers grew 100% last year. So we're definitely in that kind of high growth, growing pains zone, as it were.
Perfect. Anna O from Griffin is next. If you can give a quick intro.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I am the CRO and CCO at Griffin. Griffin is applying to become a bank in the UK. We're going to be API first, and we're building a full stack banking as a service offering. And we'll be looking to partner with companies who want to launch financial products or embed financial services into their user experiences. I've also worked as a regulator at the FSA and then the PRA Bank of England, so got experience there too.
Perfect. Thank you. We have another Anna on the panel, Anna Velvet.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Well, I just wanted to say I started off in the education system where I would work with communication skills within the financial institutions in France and Spain, and developed more of an expertise within the reg tech because of my degree in regulatory technology as well. And I founded RegTech Canada to help deal with the challenges that maybe financial institution, and also I'm veering out to small, medium-sized companies that would like to add reg tech solution to their businesses. And so that's where I'm at right now.
Perfect. Thank you. Ulish, you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I worked for 16 years, more or less, in institutional and corporate banking, where I had commercial and operational management positions. And afterwards, since 4 or 5 years now, I'm working on the other side as advisor for several regtechs in order to help banks on their regulatory compliance projects and obligations via digitalization and new technology adoption.
Perfect. And then rounding it out, we have Shelley from Mode.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Group Head of Compliance for Mode. Mode are a London Stock Exchange main market and OTC company in the US. We are are authorized by the FCA as a crypto asset business, and we also have an electronic money institution license, so we're the good guys.
Perfect. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Freddie to kick off the moderation of the webinar.
Great, thanks Amanda, and thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time out of what I know is a really, really busy part of the year for everyone. I'm personally really excited about today's webinar for two reasons. Firstly, we have an amazing group of panelists that represent high growth industries really well, from fintech, neobanks, crypto, retail banking, and human resources. It feels like we have most of the angles covered. Secondly, this topic, as head of mid-market and SMB, I have a vested interest in. So I'm really keen to learn more from the industry experts and see if we can provide any solutions to people listening. So we're going to first explore some of the challenges and pain points high growth industries experience in compliance. So we have sort of three key ones that we've laid out here to help us sort of start the discussion. They're not limited to these three key challenges, so I'm sure the panelists will be able to tell me, but I'll quickly talk through them and then I'll open up the discussion. So the first one is around compliance is time consuming and expensive. So everyone knows it's time consuming and expensive for any highly regulated company, but it can become especially expensive or time consuming for high growth ones. I'll give you some examples. Ones that I'm familiar with is around documentation, license applications, governance documents, processes. They take time and they constantly are evolving and always needing to be changed and involve multiple stakeholders. Data, that I know is a close topic to Olash's heart. It sits in disparate sources and siloed areas of the business, and that ultimately means replication of work, increased time on making decisions. And then people, they require subject matter expertise. I had a really cool conversation with Shelley earlier on about actually crypto, you know, what does that actually mean for maybe a traditional person in compliance moving over to that space? So that's the first piece. Second piece is around evidence and traceability. So these are words that are thrown about in compliance quite a lot, but I think if we break them down into, you know, some clear sort of topic areas, it becomes interesting. So internal and external obligations, they're constantly evolving with high growth companies. Internal obligations being, you know, your growing headcount, growing global footprint, growing product offerings, and that has this, I guess, relationship with your external obligations, regulatory obligations, investor obligations, pension B just IPOing, for example, and client obligations. For example, new enterprise clients requiring you to do stringent audits. So ultimately, this is around how you have information readily available, traceable, and transparent. And then the final piece, before I go on for too long, is around compliance being difficult to scale. So executing compliance programs for high growth companies can be reactive. It can also be great because you've got a clean slate, but that means that you're constantly dealing with spinning plates, and being able to manage these different priorities as you're growing can be painful and hard to scale efficiently. So that's ultimately the context. I'll hand over to the panelists. Between all of you, you have a wealth of experience working in high growth companies, all at different stages of the maturity. Do any of these challenges mentioned resonate with you? And if so, which ones and why? I'm going to hand over to Shelley first.
Well, thank you. Yes, so absolutely, these are our pain points. And when working in a startup or scale up, there isn't the team of foot soldiers behind you that perhaps in traditional finance it is more the way things happen. And there's also a need to be able to jump from one subject to another as a subject matter expert in a very short amount of time, because it could just be you. So at the very beginning of a startup, what a company needs is its policies, its procedures, everything ready for its licenses. By the time any license is granted, of course, those are all out of date. And perhaps the person who kicked off compliance at that point has lost the will to live, because it does take a lot of time. And good compliance people like to be busy delivering compliance and not just sitting around and waiting for their licenses to come in. The other issue is that you can only take a risk-based and iterative approach. So this morning, when you asked me, how do you choose what to do? It starts off by us choosing what we don't want to do. And what we don't want to do is try to boil the ocean in one day. So a risk register that is mapped to your risk appetite means you don't have to guess what your biggest risks are. Your organization has already told you what the biggest risks are, and then it's up to matching that with your risk appetite, and that gives you your layers of priority. If there are priorities that there isn't time to do, then it takes the emotion out of asking for resource to complete stuff that you maybe don't have to hand, and allows the business to make a fact-based decision on whether the appetite is set at the right level or whether the risk can be mitigated in faster ways or different ways than the original roadmap. So yeah, loads to do, which is quite different in this environment to the big banking environment.
Brilliant. And Adi, I'm going to maybe hand over to you. I've had, I've been able to see your maturity as you've gone from a limited company to a public company. What sort of challenges has that presented in compliance?
Yeah, sure. So I actually only joined PensionBee in April 2021, but still in the kind of crossover phase to IPO. And before PensionBee, I was with a company called Transact, who kind of did the PensionBee journey, but 20 years earlier, and IPO'd about 3 years ago. So it's quite good because it's quite a stark difference, even though they're both kind of successful companies that are doing things the right way. So I think one of the main issues is like the kind of old adage, you can't beat experience. So in a company that's been around 20 years, has been listed for however many years, your legal and compliance department has like 5 people, 10 people, 15. Like Transact had 21 people in the compliance department. Average amount of experience, 12 years, 20 years. Obviously, when you're a startup, whether you're or a fintech that's growing, whether you've IPO'd or you're on the cusp or you've just passed that checkpoint, there's no way you're going to have that level of staff or experience. So it's kind of, which comes to like, which is part of the issue with why we use clause match, which is you can't rely on individuals knowing what to do or people just being able to call someone. You have to have that kind of centralized database or hub of information, procedures and policies, because otherwise it's like kind of like queuing to see a GP. If you've got one GP with a queue of 1,000 people, like you can't deal with that. You need to have people that can figure things out, but at the same time can come and ask the specialists what to do. And I think the issue with one of the challenges with traditional compliance tools, again, I think the traditional tools assume you've got 5 lawyers and 20 people in compliance and risk, because that's how a big company operates. Like if you look at any big company in like PensionBee's ecosystem, all those departments are going to be big. They're not going to be like count on one hand how many people. So those tools are built to deal with that mindset, and the division of labor is built on the basis that there's a lot of people there and there's a lot of resources. And so yeah, it's just eventually I think most startups or fintechs will grow until they end up being ironically as big as the big companies. But whilst you're kind of climbing that mountain, you'll be in a zone where you only have so many staff, so many resources, but you have to do the whole spectrum. But the companies that have been doing that for 10 years, 15 years, 100 years have 50 people doing that spectrum. So it's really about efficiency, I think, efficiency and the ability to for people to find what they're looking for easily.
Great, thanks, Adi. Anna Rowe, so you're on this journey towards becoming a fully fledged bank. You've joined Griffin recently. How do you go about identifying where the sort of the burning challenges are and the ones that you want to focus on?
Yes, I would just echo what's already been said. Prioritization is probably one of the biggest challenges I find I appreciate we're not operating yet, but we're very much in a high growth industry and there's always something urgent. And as Shelley was saying, it's stopping yourself and saying, but is that really going to manage my compliance risk for this firm or not? And if it's not, am I really the right person to be doing that? Or should it be being done at all? So prioritization is difficult, but I think other things that have already been touched on as well really resonated, just the volume of work. So not necessarily big ticket items, but just the volume of work coming in. And naturally in smaller startups, as they move towards high growth, I find that recruitment almost is behind the curve in compliance. It tends to be something that is looked at when you're already at breaking point. And so you're constantly, just from a volume point of view, behind. And so anything you can do to automate it, which I know is some of what we'll talk about later, is obviously useful. And I think one of the other challenges that if you've been in a company through startup phase and you go into kind of the high growth stage, is you've been with it throughout that entire period. And sometimes you're the lone compliance person for a very long period. And so people look to you to consult on anything, sometimes not even compliance things. And it can be hard to let that go. So it's as much about the behavior of the person who's been perhaps in the chief compliance officer role. As you scale, you've got to start delegating decision making. And people naturally like to go to the same person for decisions because they get a consistent answer, a consistent kind of appetite for things. But if you can standardize decision making and delegate it down, you know, that classic kind of bottleneck of the CCO making all the decisions helps move the business and does help the compliance function scale. The only other thing I would probably add as well, if I sort of talk about an example I've had before, I used to run a doctor's surgery when I was a head of compliance, so role below the one I do now at a previous firm, and I would have tens of people queuing around my desk. And that was because compliance is always encouraged to be part of the business. Don't just be the person who sits in the corner, be available, be useful, add value. And I realized I was answering the same questions over and over again. And I thought to myself, if I've answered this 3 times, I need to write something down. Getting people to go and look at what's written down before they ask you, that's a behavioral thing that I haven't always mastered. But it definitely helps the compliance grow or scale in a high growth company if you're able to empower the first line to do a lot of it for themselves.
And that's quite interesting around the knowledge sharing piece and making sure that other people have, I guess, the responsibilities than just that initial person in the compliance function. Olush, as you've worked with lots of different levels of maturities of organizations, where are you seeing information being leveraged to help with that challenge, or what are the examples of challenges where, you know, this has happened, where information is scattered around the organization, and what sort of pain points does that cause?
You're absolutely right to ask the question, Freddie. You know, for years now, we're saying that RegTech isn't developing as quickly as it has to, because of the fact that actually technology companies, most of them, work apart from the company, the financial institutions or the regulated companies on the markets. And from what I see is that the only way it could work, and it works, is having and implementing a partnership between the regulated company itself and the RegTech, who actually should work as an agile team, where the compliance managers, operational people on the ground who has the knowledge and the prerequisites on what has to be reported vis-a-vis the regulators, share this information together with the RegTech teams in order to make sure that this magic formula functions, collaboration between business experts together with the RegTech teams who actually can implement on an iterative basis. So the challenge is really make sure that this information flow goes in, and that RegTech and regulated companies work hand in hand as partners, I think.
I completely agree. I think collaboration is definitely going to become more of a theme, especially for areas or regulations which are new. There's going to be needing that collaboration between the regulator, the RegTech, and the regulated. Anna, Velvet. So where does people's skills come into this, and what are some of the challenges that you're seeing?
Well, the skill aspect is very important because of the fact that technology is the key to RegTech. So what happens is you're taking people that are developers from any industry and saying, okay, we're going to put them into a crypto space, or we're going to put them in a financial space. And this is where we're missing out on the human element part of it. Because just because you can take this person as a developer doesn't mean that he understands the regulation, he understands the actual industry. And that's where the skill is kind of lacking to that extent. yes, you can get a developer that can make some products and solutions and things like that. But at the same time, it is them getting to understand the actual industry itself. You had asked earlier this morning about tier one or tier one bank, and just getting them to put them into like a crypto space. You could probably do that, but then you're also having to think about the regulation in regarding to that sector. I know for us here in Canada, we are always looking for blockchain experts that are actually needed within the financial institution. And so, yes, you can have people that are developers that use some of the language, but if they don't understand the financial component or they're not actually experienced in that, you're still going to need somebody that's going to be training them in regarding to that. So this is where I find is lacking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, understood and completely agree. I feel the pain, I feel the challenges. Okay, perfect. I think we should now move in. Now we've kind of set the context in terms of the challenges and the pains. Let's maybe talk through some solutions, and none other than the old school framework, people, process, and technology. Let's see what we can talk through in terms of using that framework. It always helps, even though it's an old favorite. So people, I'm actually going to, Anna Velvet kind of already brought up this this topic, so I'm going to hand over this question to Shelley. Talk me through, what you're thinking when you're looking to hire a compliance officer at Mode, and is there a gap currently? Are there specific skills that are that transfer from maybe a traditional financial institution or not? It'd be good to get your view on that.
Yeah, so thank you. Yes, there is a huge talent drought within crypto because crypto doesn't necessarily attract compliance people just by its very nature of being decentralized and then not being the sorts of standards and benchmarks there. That is our comfort zone as compliance people. But yeah, what skill sets are needed is the broadest of skill sets. And what I talked about earlier today, and I talk about quite a lot on LinkedIn, is we're having a brilliant time. And I get phone calls and messages of people saying, we want to work in crypto. And I'll say, cool, have you done any courses? No. Do you own an NFT? Have you bought any Ethereum, Doge, Bitcoin? Oh, no, that's well dodgy. And at that point, it feels to me like the conversation has no value anymore. And I do like to use stuff that people will remember. And the terminology that I got for this, it's just coincidental I'm wearing this today, is my t-shirt, which says, it's not Dior. So it's not Christian Dior. There's no sort of being treated like that. It's DYOR, which means do your own research. And the darlings bit, that's all me. But yeah, basically people who come into the space, they need to invest in their own skills, their own talents. If you're in a startup, they're not going to spoon feed you. There is no free lunch and there are no passengers. And for someone who that excites them, that's the sort of person the industry will take on because that raw talent is what's needed. And most importantly, the ability to collaborate. And that's what the whole of Web3 is about, is that nobody is the single owner and the single director of the compliance knowledge. It takes a village to raise the compliance child, and that village are your colleagues. So yes, you need to bring them with you on the journey.
And I guess this moves away a bit from the people discussion, but it's very relevant. And it's a second question to you, Shelley, is that, crypto being an industry which is very new, there's no real strict regulation in place. And I guess that is scary to some compliance people who have a compliance career. What, other than the crypto companies, what else can be done to try and improve the, I guess, perception the crypto space and help actually sort of validate it? What can be done?
Yeah, so companies like Mode, my company, we are registered as a crypto asset business. That took 2.5 years with the FCA. We have a concurrent EMI license that also took 2.5 years with the FCA. That demonstrates, it gives me the evidence that the organization has put marks of credibility front and center of what we do. It's cost millions of pounds, and we could not be happier that we have those marks of credibility. And so it becomes really disturbing to be tarred by a brush of operators who don't take their customer obligations as seriously. And what I love most about the space is that I was able to hit the ground running. So I come from a traditional compliance background. I've worked in private banking, I've worked in insurance, I've worked for the Big Four, and the skills that I got from there are utterly transferable. If you're onboarding, you're onboarding. The red flags might be slightly different, but the skill set and the rigor and the discipline is the same. If you're monitoring transactions, this is a good one about technology as well, is that it's taken till this year for there to be transaction monitoring capabilities that cover fiat and crypto. And that's remarkable. For me, that signifies that crypto has actually met the tipping point and become a financial instrument that we're as comfortable dealing with, if we're a little bit crazy sometimes, as we're as comfortable with as certain types of fiat and other instruments. So yeah, having that bringing together of what were two disparate environments into a single environment really has signaled quite a step change for the industry.
And I don't want to direct this sort of follow-up question to anyone specific, but just feel free to jump in. You know, what other sort of solutions or things that you're seeing around hiring compliance people or subject matter expertise into your startup or scale up or fintech?
I think education is really the key. I do believe that once you can put some kind of training, some kind of education in regarding to that, that will definitely help bring all the people in the ecosystem together. I find that when like that situation with Shelly, where people say, "Oh, I want to get into crypto," but they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, that's a reason why we should have it more promoted out there, the education, because there will be a need, because we can fill those droughts. And I'm seeing that for myself in regarding the people that I hire for other companies that are in the crypto space.
I would add as well, if you're in a startup that you know is going to evolve as they naturally do, they have a strategy and one naturally ends up doing a lot more than was ever intended. The way I'm thinking about building out our function, I look at two areas that you need to sort of fill, which is one, yeah, there will be some very technical areas where you need people with that specialism already in place, whether that's through education or experience. But you also need people who just have good analytical skills, can research regulation and apply it, and have the thing I always look for in interview processes and assessment processes, good judgment when it's grey, because so much of where compliance can't be automated is the judgments that sit in the grey space. And those people are really useful in a high growth market because you don't necessarily know the geography you're going to end up in, the products that you might add. And if they've got that, as Shelley said, a transferable skill set that can just look at the problem that's being presented to them, analyze it, and then translate that into what the business needs to do to stay in compliance, that is really useful, as well as the kind of key technical specialists on the areas you know you need now.
I could not agree more. And Olush, I'm so sorry I'm going to put you on the spot, because you are a prime example of someone like that. You I know you're a modest person, but if you can talk through how you've used your different analytical skills to solve different use cases and projects at different institutions, that would be great. You're on mute, Olish.
Voila. I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much, Freddie. So I'm getting red now on a blank wall. Thank you for this feedback. Yeah. From what I see is that I'm sure that you will all agree. I like simplicity, and I'm sure that that's what differentiates satisfying technology solutions from other ones, right? And I'm sure, Freddie, when you do a demo, and that's why Close Match is actually growing that much, you see that what resonates with the potential users is to make sure that technology is simple to use, right? Otherwise, it's not usable if it doesn't make my life simple and ensure that I can do other useful stuff and make sure that technology works. That's fine. But you mentioned that. I think that's. I have a banking background, and point is that now we're looking, and you mentioned data, and data is everything. If you look to regulations and compliance, and we have several professionals here, regulators give a huge value on false negatives. They don't want to have false negatives at all. And regulated companies put huge value on false positives. They don't want to have false positives because it takes time, it annoys their clients, etc. So in order to see that and analyze that, you really have to have data analytics skills and make sure that you can actually ensure that the regulators and the compliance solutions and expectations, you can actually have a statistical machine learning and a data analytical view in order to make sure that everything fits in. And that's what I try to reach out on my side. I said to make sure that actually if technology can be simple, it has to be that you have a global helicopter view, I think.
And brilliant. And I guess, Adi, just to sort of finalize this part around people, and it ties into technology too, I guess. How at PensionBee are you moving from being an organization where you've gone now into sort of a more mature compliance program? How are you ensuring that people are aware of what their obligations are and that you are ultimately compliant in all the specific and relevant areas?
Yeah, it's like a multi-dimensional solution, because you've got like, again, it goes to the principle that in a startup, if you've got 15 employees, you're not going to have a chartered accountant and a 15-year qualified corporate commercial lawyer who understands tax, and you're like first 10 employees. But as you travel down the road, you're going to get to the stage where you do need those people. You do need the people with risk experience and compliance experience, because you're building it's like a spectrum. It's really wide, as you know. So it's a case of you need the right people, because you can have really competent people, but you don't know what you don't know. Like, kind of trying to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, where he said, "There's known unknowns and there's unknown unknowns." So if you don't know the subject matter, you don't know the boundary of what you do and you don't know, until you bring in those people that can actually look way beyond and say, actually, we need to do this, we need to do that. The way we do this is okay now, but it needs to go like this in a year or two's time. So it's multi-layered. It's like the higher level experienced people implementing the procedures and processes, upgrading existing procedures and processes, software side, whether it's monitoring, or it's clause match, or it's AML monitoring software. So it's really a multi-layered, multi-dimensional approach. But I think the fundamental point is these companies reach a curve, and up to here, it's fine doing what you were doing and what everyone thought was fine. But once you go past a certain level, you really need those people who within reason know what we need today and what we need tomorrow. It's like anything. It's like IT or accounting. You can outsource a lot of your payroll stuff and this and that, you'll reach a stage where like you can't jump to the size of Google and be outsourcing everything you're doing that's not core IT. Do you know what I mean? So it's really having that insight internally and being able to implement that into a framework that's going to like allow the other people to do what they need to do, basically.
Great, thanks, Adi. I'm looking at time. I think let's move to process. So processes. When we're talking about processes, it's, you know, what can be put in place to ensure that people responsible for doing certain things are doing things in the right way, efficiently and effectively. What are the guidelines or sort of the things that people need to do and what's expected of them? So what processes need to be in place to ensure the compliance function can scale with your business? Has anyone got any experiences or examples to share to sort of set the scene of this piece?
Yes, but as we only have 45 minutes for the whole webinar, I'm going to keep it really brief. The processes that needed scaling for us, we had to be able to automate our controls and embed those within our systems build, because we weren't going to ever plan to have an army of people checking on stuff manually. And because we've got a blank sheet of paper to build upon, we have this incredible opportunity to build a risk management governance framework from scratch and get it right first time. And I know that that can be done in a matter of weeks, whereas if you're looking to fix a compliance and risk management and governance framework that's been in play, that's probably a 2 or 3 year project for a medium-sized firm.
I would really support that, Shelley, because in more established firms that started, you know, sort of pre-technology or in the early stages, the business gets increasingly frustrated with yet another checklist that the compliance function has created for them to try and make sure that the business can scale and compliance isn't doing everything, or another process document or guidance of some description, and they don't use it because it's not easy to use. And so if you can automate as much as possible, you know, a prompt, give the customer this information now, don't forget to upload this document here, and automate it into their processes, is exactly the same. They're not just having to come out of what they're doing to find the checklist that you've diligently prepared for them and no one uses.
Great, perfect answers. And we are going to break the rules a little bit. I don't know if Amanda's going to let me, but let's go on for another 10 minutes so that we can finish off this final part on technology, which ultimately is the bit that I'm interested most to talk about. So if we move to the final piece, technology. So I think the first thing is, you know, and this is before this any of the questions that are here, how do you prioritize what's important in terms of choosing technology? There's so many different areas to focus on. You can start client-facing first on onboarding. You can be looking at you know, regulatory change, improving your governance documentation, like your policy framework. You know, where do you start, and how do you identify what the priority is?
I think it's two aspects, Freddie. It's what Shelley said right at the beginning. So if you know where your biggest compliance risks are, anywhere that they are, and technology can help reduce that level of risk, that should be a priority. But I think it's also about, just as a compliance officer, sitting down and saying, where does my team spend most of their time? And that's got to be, so if you think about it, you are always going to be asking for money to do this, and engineering time if it's in-house. So you've got to have a pretty good reason to say, well, this takes my team X long to do. If you bring this in, it will take a reduced amount, which means we can do other things, and we will reduce our risk in this area. So they've got to be the two main drivers, in my opinion.
So mitigating risk and cost saving are those sort of two key sort of levers. Go on, Shelley.
Okay, well, I've actually got another point on this that I get really pumped about, because it didn't exist 10 years ago. You wanted to be a bank, you had to build yourself to be a bank. And now we have banking as a service, software as a service. You can outsource, you don't transfer the regulatory accountability, but you can transfer out some of the legwork and the heavy lifting to a wide number of organizations who are specialized at delivering the service that startups just don't have the appetite to build and refine from day one. And let's see, first of all, if they have a viable business, and then they can bring it in-house. But yeah, it's this collaboration matter again, is that there is a lot more cooperation in my crypto space than I've seen in any other part of the financial services world.
That's very true, Shelley. And this isn't a plug for Griffin. This is relevant, but our market as a bank as a service provider is startup EMIs and payment institutions. And our service is to combine the banking as a service element and your compliance as a service. So we will do that for you as far as we're allowed to under the outsourcing rules, knowing that early stage EMIs and PIs just don't have the resource available all the time to build a fully fledged compliance function from the beginning.
And so I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway. So if you're a very early stage startup or sort of pre-banking license like yourself, Griffin, would you recommend getting regulatory technology into the organization as soon as possible, or is there a certain point in time when you sort of move to using technology before just relying on the people?
So my preference would always be to get it in first, early on, before you've launched. But in reality, you will not always be able to get in everything you want, because there's a permanent cash return conversation happening. So you have to think about what are the ones that, if I miss the opportunity to get them in at the right time later, are going to cause the biggest problems. So one of the ones we're prioritizing is making sure we have reg tech for reporting. As we said right at the beginning of the call, reporting to investors, reporting to internally, reporting to the regulators. That needs to be automated because it is just a sucker of time. And also, if you get it wrong, there's clearly implications of that. So get everything you can as a compliance officer, but you might not win every fight.
And then Olush, go on. Sorry, please, Anna.
I think it's also a good thing to get that type of solution as well for small, medium-sized businesses that are already working on other things in their business. And instead of having to trying to formulate some kind of reg tech solution in their industry, that if you can jump on board and have something that is effective, that can work within their business, it actually will prevent things like cybersecurity breaches and things like that, things that we're not really talking about, but it is becoming a major issue for small and medium-sized business. So I definitely would jump on board with Anna on that one as well for SMB.
No, I completely agree. And of course, I'm an advocate of organizations using technology as early on as possible. But I actually do believe it. I think it's the right way going forward. Olush, for you, so when you're working as an advisor for organizations, what are typically the sort of the humps and bumps that organizations come into when they ultimately trying to request budget for regulatory technology? And is there any sort of tactics or things that you've learned that help with creating an effective business case?
So each and every institution with whom I've worked, everybody will have three motivations. A bank or a financial institution will say, okay, as we mentioned, is it simple to use? Secondly, will it bring me efficiencies of costs? And third, will I get competitive advantage on that? So you have to really work on these three aspects, I would say, and make sure that you really see the motivation and the culture of the company. And the buy-in will be actually most of the banks or financial institutions or startups or scale-ups actually who are reluctant to use technology and try to use it in-house. They're afraid of the fact that, first of all, they say, okay, if I work with a RegTech company next year, will they be there? Will they ask 20% more for the same level of service? And what is the operational and risk assessment of their processes? So if you make if you make sure that actually you're here for a long time and you will have a stable partnership, I would say you've got the buy-in, potential buy-in to work for.
So you're saying only work with regtechs that have VC money?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're a regtech with 2-3 people and you go to a bank of 1,000 people and say, okay, we have an amazing solution, what's the guarantee that next year you will be there? So yeah, indeed, you will have to show some guarantees, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Especially financial institutions. Yeah, they look out for that. That's the reputation that they look out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm too familiar filling out questionnaires, due diligence, risk assessments, thousands of lines of questions. I know the joy.
What a lovely job you have.
Oh, and it's only a small part, but yeah, exactly. Any final comments, notes that people want to share before we wrap things up?
You just asked Freddie as well, and I had just a couple of quick thoughts on what advice would you give to organizations when implementing RegTech. Anna touched on one of them much earlier on in a different context, but in my experience, the bit that I underestimated was how long the configuration takes. And that's for a couple of reasons. I think sometimes the RegTechs are trying to give you too much configuration, and it can almost paralyze you in a way because there's so many things it can do. And I think you always just in that situation have to go back to first principles and say, okay, what would I be doing if I was doing this on my desk? And that's what I should replicate in the system. Yes, it can do all of these other things, but do I actually need that? Is it going to reduce my risk in any way? Or is it going to, as I said, just paralyze me either in the configuration stage or in the data that it gives me? But the other thing that Anna said was that a lot of the regtechs, in my experience, don't have as experienced people as you would hope on the regulatory side. And so there can be a disconnect that you need a translator for. So you're outlining your requirements and the outcomes that you're trying to get. And the regtech provider doesn't understand like what the driver is from the regulations, whether that's money laundering or the payment service regulations. And I think the regtechs that really succeed are ones that have that experience, and you don't need the translation exercise in between. And just the other thing I would say as well, the partners we've gone with are ones that have understood we're a startup, and so have been really flexible in the fee model and in the kind of modular elements that we can start small, we can add on, obviously fees then grow with that, recognizing that we're an early stage startup, but we have great high growth aspirations, and they're the partners, you know, that will work long term because it is a partnership. And we always talk to them about what outcome we want, and they've worked with us to design a solution for us around that.
All really great points, and I know a lot of the feedback in terms of working with Griffin has helped inform, you know, how we can work better at Clause Match with SMB clients. So yeah, no, great answers.
I'll just add a final few comments. So yeah, so just to recap what I said earlier, basically, I don't think you can exist in this field if you're in the regulated zone, just relying on people and processes. There's always going to be 1 or 2 or 3 software parts of your domain that create the ecosystem where compliance and risk and legal operate. With executive buy-in, hopefully if you're in the regulated field, the executives know that you need to comply, otherwise you have to wonder why they're in the executive. And advice to high growth organizations implementing RegTech, try and do it before you're kind of not quite drowning, but under duress, because there is a with implementing any software, in my experience, you need to figure out the best way to do it, and it takes time to like bed in, and then it also takes time for people to actually, the people who are actually at the cold face making it work, and then it works, and then the people that have never seen it before have to know how to use it. So if you wait until the 11th hour to say, right, we're going to implement this software, the people who are actually going to figure out how it works for ABC organization, they're going to have to take time to figure it out. Once they can make it work, then the people that have never seen it before in the organization have to be able to use it easily. So if you wait till like you're against the wall to say, oh, I've now the executive given in, you can buy the software. Do you know what I mean? It's going to take 3-4 months for everyone to actually be able to use it normally. But yeah, I think where we are now, even before coronavirus and the kind of exponential growth of technology and everything remote and everything digital to a factor of 5, you definitely need that. You need the software side, the human side, and then the procedure process side. You can't kind of lean too heavily in one zone. It's like a 3-way solution, I think.
Great, thank you, Addy. And Shelley, you've been patiently waiting with your hand up. I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I have mentioned on a number of occasions in the last hour about collaboration and supporting and helping people to transition into this industry and to transition to supporting my industry. And it really is an authentic invitation. I'm on LinkedIn. All of us guys are on LinkedIn. Please drop us a line if there's anything of interest. It is a very collaborative space at the moment. It isn't the awful sort of competitiveness and no one talks to anyone that traditional finance has. And we're having fun, so it's a good place to be.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you. Great, so I think that wraps it up. I'll hand over to Amanda, but before that, just want to say thank you again for all of the contributions from the panelists. I really enjoyed that discussion. Hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Freddie. I know we had a couple of questions in the Q&A box, but I know we're running over, so we'll answer those individually and reach out to the people who asked them. But before we wrap up, I do just want to remind you, we will be sending a link to the recording as well as the presentation tomorrow. So if for any reason you don't receive that in your inbox, please reach out to us. And then lastly, we do have a report why RegTech is heating up across high growth markets. The content is very relevant to what the presenters and the panelists were speaking on today. So I'll include a link to that in the follow-up email tomorrow. So with that, I want to thank Freddie and all the panelists again for all your insight. And of course, thank you guys for attending. We hope you have a great day. Take care.
Great, thank you. See you.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.